It began quietly, almost unnoticeably, as most discoveries in astronomy do. A routine night at the Mauna Kea Observatory in Hawaii, with its massive telescopes trained on the black void between stars, turned into something no one could have predicted. At first, the team was simply cataloguing known interstellar objects, small bodies wandering between systems, relics of cosmic formation. Among them was a faintly visible long-studied traveller known as 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object ever detected passing through our solar system. It was supposed to be nothing but a rock, lifeless, silent, insignificant. Yet in the early hours of that cold morning, a small blip appeared on the radio spectrum analyzer, a rhythmic pulse, faint, repeating, every 47 minutes exactly. At first, no one took it seriously. Space is full of noise-cosmic background radiation, pulsars, distant quasars, even reflections from Earth's own transmissions. But this pulse was different. It wasn't random static. It had order. When the first readings came in, one of the young astronomers, Dr. Lynn Torres, thought it was a calibration error. She reset the instruments, cross-checked the signal, and ran the analysis again. The same pattern emerged, identical intervals, precisely timed. She asked her colleague, Dr. Han Morita, to confirm the data from the second array. He frowned, double-checked, and looked up. "It's still there," he said, "and it's getting stronger." Within hours, the signal had been recorded at 3 separate observation sites: Mauna Kea, the Very Large Array in New Mexico, and the European Southern Observatory in Chile. The chance that all 3 instruments could be receiving identical interference was statistically impossible. Triangulation placed the origin point in deep space, the exact position of 3I Atlas. That changed everything. The object had been catalogued years earlier as a cold, tumbling piece of interstellar debris measuring roughly 450 meters across. Its trajectory was known, its path predictable. It emitted no heat, no radio emissions, nothing to suggest activity of any kind. Until now. The news spread through private scientific channels faster than anyone could contain it. Within a day, analysts at NASA's Deep Space Network were examining the raw data. They confirmed what the astronomers already suspected. The signal was real, structured, and perfectly timed. A repeating radio pulse at a frequency of 4.7 gigahertz. Faint, but unnaturally stable. Someone suggested it could be a reflection of human-made transmissions, perhaps from a deep space probe. But the pattern didn't match anything launched from Earth. It wasn't bouncing back. It was originating from the object itself. The discovery was immediately classified. All communication between observatories was ordered to route through NASA's Central Analysis Hub. For most researchers, that was the end of the story. They submitted their data and returned to their nightly routines. But not everyone was ready to move on. Dr. Torres, unable to shake her curiosity, copied the initial spectrograms onto a private drive before the servers were locked down. That night she replayed the data on her laptop, feeding the signal through an audio filter. What emerged wasn't random static. It was a rhythm, steady, mechanical, almost like a heartbeat. She increased the playback speed. The pulse deepened, rising and falling in a strange cadence that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't music. It wasn't noise. It was communication of some kind, but from what? The next morning, she contacted 2 trusted colleagues outside NASA's network, an astrophysicist from Cambridge and a radio engineer from Tokyo. Together they analysed the timing structure. The intervals between pulses weren't arbitrary. They followed a mathematical pattern, one that appeared to encode prime numbers. In the language of the cosmos, primes often serve as a universal marker, the simplest signal of intelligence. If this is artificial, her colleague in Tokyo said quietly, then someone built something out there. By the end of the week, the story began to leak. A handful of science blogs reported unexplained radioactivity near 3I Atlas, though most readers dismissed it as another internet rumour. NASA released a short statement calling the signal instrumental interference and denied any extraterrestrial source. Internally, however, the agency's tone was far less casual. Internal memos referred to the phenomenon as Atlas 47, a reference to its 47-minute periodicity. Engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory were instructed to monitor deep space receivers for any variation. They found one. On the fourth day, the pulse changed. The frequency shifted slightly, a fraction of a hertz, as though the source were adjusting itself. Then it returned to normal. To those studying the signal, this was the most chilling discovery of all. Natural phenomena don't adjust. They don't fine-tune their own frequencies. Something was responding. For Dr. Torres, sleep became impossible. She spent her nights staring at the graphs, watching the symmetrical waves repeat endlessly. Sometimes she thought she saw subtle modulations, small distortions, like someone trying to speak through layers of interference. The more she analysed, the more deliberate it appeared. Her Cambridge colleague ran the signal through a digital pattern recognition model designed for SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The result was unexpected. The system assigned a 98.7% non-random probability. In plain terms, the computer thought it was a message. When the results were sent back to NASA's encrypted servers, the response was immediate and final. All external research access was revoked. Emails went unanswered. The Deep Space Network's logs for 3i Atlas were scrubbed, leaving only data unavailable entries. To the public, 3i Atlas was now just another forgotten rock. But behind closed doors, the discussions grew more serious. A leaked audio recording from an internal briefing surfaced months later. In it, an unidentified NASA official can be heard saying, "We don't know what it is, but it's transmitting consistently. There's no known mechanism for that on a non-rotating, non-magnetic body. Either it's reflecting something unknown, or it's active." By the end of the month, the signal's intensity had doubled. Amateur astronomers, using consumer-grade receivers, began to detect faint traces of it themselves. Forums lit up with speculation, everything from alien beacons to cosmic beeps from dark matter experiments. Government agencies stayed silent. Then, one night, something even stranger happened. The signal stopped. No warning, no gradual fade, just silence. Hours passed. Observatories around the world confirmed the absence. Scientists assumed the source had gone quiet, perhaps due to interference or distance. But 47 minutes later, precisely on schedule, the pulse returned. Stronger, cleaner, sharper. It was as if whatever was sending it had noticed it was being watched and had decided to respond more clearly. When Dr. Torres received the new dataset, she sat frozen. The waveform looked familiar, but when she inverted it, flipping it backward, a second pattern appeared beneath the original. It was as if two signals were layered together, one forward, one reversed. That level of complexity defied any natural explanation. She stared at her screen for a long time before whispering, "It's trying to talk." No official comment ever came from NASA after that. Internal correspondence ceased entirely. But every 47 minutes the pulse continues to reach Earth, faint but steady like a cosmic metronome ticking in the dark. Astronomers who dare to record it note subtle variations, as though the signal were evolving over time. Some claim the intervals between pulses are changing, shortening slowly, drawing closer together. If that's true, it means one thing. 3i, Atlas isn't just drifting through our solar system. It's approaching something or someone. And somewhere, in the silence between those rhythmic beats, lies a message humanity has yet to understand. When the signal from 3i Atlas first appeared in the data streams from Mauna Kea, it was dismissed as a localized anomaly. But within just 4 days, the same repeating pulse began to show up in recordings from independent observatories across Europe. In Italy, France, Germany, and the Czech Republic, amateur radio astronomers and university researchers detected the same narrowband emission, repeating every 47 minutes, synchronized within seconds of the Hawaiian readings. What made this impossible was not just the precision of the timing, but the fact that each observation came from different latitudes, using different equipment, under different atmospheric conditions. The signal was unmistakably real. At first, scientists thought it could be a reflection from Earth-based communications, perhaps a classified satellite or radar bounce, but the frequency range just below 1420 Alzheimer's was significant. It was the so-called hydrogen line, the natural radio emission frequency of neutral hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe, and the exact frequency that many SETI researchers have long considered the best channel for extraterrestrial communication. Yet 3 Atlas wasn't a planet, or a moon, or even an active comet. It was a fragment of rock and ice, moving through the solar system at 26 kilometers per second, with no known mechanism to produce a signal of any kind. And still, every 47 minutes the pulse arrived again, unwavering, steady and timed like the tick of a cosmic clock. In the early hours of January 14th, an independent radio operator in Turin, Italy, named Lorenzo Guidi, posted on an astronomy forum that he had recorded a narrow repeating signal near 1420 MHz, right in the hydrogen band, and that it appeared to drift slightly in frequency, consistent with Doppler shift caused by a fast-moving object. Within hours, his post was shared across scientific networks, and a coordinated effort began to verify his findings. By the next day, over a dozen observatories had confirmed the same signal pattern. Someone from the European Space Agency quietly contacted the administrators of the forum and asked that further data not be shared publicly. That, of course, only fueled curiosity. Soon, open-source analysts began comparing data logs, timestamps, and Doppler profiles. The conclusion was inescapable. The signal was real, consistent, and coming directly from the coordinates of 3i Atlas. What confused the scientists most was the structure of the signal. It wasn't random noise or a simple sine wave. It contained modulation, subtle amplitude variations that seemed to encode something. Not binary code, not Morse, but a rhythmic pattern, like a heartbeat with irregular intervals, as if following an unknown logic. Teams at the University of Cambridge and the Max Planck Institute for Radio Astronomy began running digital analyses. They filtered the signal through fast Fourier transforms, searched for harmonics, and even converted it to audio to identify repeating motifs. The pattern didn't match any known natural radio source, such as pulsars or quasars, nor did it resemble the structured artificial bursts of human technology. One researcher privately admitted, "It's almost like something is trying to synchronize with us, or test whether we're listening." For decades, SETI scientists had dreamed of a clear, undeniable message from the stars. Yet when something like it finally appeared, it came not from a distant star system, but from a tumbling interstellar object already passing through our own. Meanwhile, NASA remained silent. Officially, there was no public statement, only brief internal updates confirming that the data was under review. In the absence of transparency, speculation flourished. Some suggested that the signal might be a natural resonance caused by solar wind interacting with a metallic core. Others argued that no known process could produce such precise repetition at that frequency. A few went further, proposing that 3i Atlas could be a remnant of alien technology, perhaps a dormant probe that had somehow reactivated as it passed close to the Sun. By late January, observatories in Poland and Spain reported that the signal's pulse duration was changing slightly, lengthening by a fraction of a second with each cycle. That meant it wasn't perfectly mechanical. Something was evolving. A team in France noticed that the modulation envelope, the amplitude shape of each pulse, repeated every 24 hours, suggesting some kind of daily pattern, possibly influenced by Earth's rotation or the object's own spin. To test this, a group of astronomers in Finland attempted to triangulate the exact point of emission by combining timing data from multiple observatories. When they did, the coordinates aligned precisely with the known path of 3i Atlas. No other object in the sky matched. It was, beyond any doubt, the source. On February 1st, after weeks of mounting intrigue, a leaked report surfaced online, allegedly from an internal ESA document. It stated that preliminary analysis indicates that the emission exhibits structured periodic modulation inconsistent with known natural processes. The phrase spread like wildfire through the scientific community. Structured periodic modulation, those three words changed everything. Suddenly, what had been an obscure anomaly became the centre of global attention. Even major news outlets began to take notice, though most reported it cautiously, framing it as a possible artifact until official confirmation arrived. But for those who had seen the raw data, there was little doubt. Something out there, something moving between the stars, was transmitting. One of the few astronomers willing to speak publicly was Dr. Eva Kramer from the University of Bonn. She'd been among the first to analyse the signal independently. In a recorded interview she said quietly, "When we mapped the pulse amplitude, it formed a repeating fractal pattern. It's as if the information is encoded geometrically, not linearly. That's not how humans transmit data. That's something else entirely." After her interview, Kramer reportedly declined further media contact. Her colleagues said she had been asked to remain silent. But amateur astronomers, unbound by institutional secrecy, continued their observations. Some claimed the pulse had begun to include faint secondary signals, harmonics, like echoes within echoes. Others reported that as 3II Atlas moved farther from the Sun, the signal was slowly increasing in intensity, not fading. That was perhaps the most mysterious part. An object millions of kilometers away, without power, without propulsion, transmitting with growing strength as it left our solar system behind. It made no sense, and yet, every 47 minutes the pulse continued, steady, calm, deliberate, as if waiting for someone to finally understand. In the quiet of observatories across Europe, among rows of flickering screens and endless streams of data, scientists kept listening. The universe, for the first time in decades, seemed to be whispering back. 3 weeks after the strange signal from 3I Atlas began drawing worldwide attention, the story took a turn that no one was prepared for. It was February 23rd when observatories in Chile and Spain independently reported that the interstellar object's trajectory had changed. Not dramatically, but measurably. A deviation of just 0.04 degrees from its predicted path was enough to raise alarms among orbital analysts. The change was subtle, yet unmistakable. Interstellar objects, governed only by gravity and inertia, simply don't alter their own course. For the past months, 3I Atlas had been moving on a clean hyperbolic trajectory, a path that would carry it out of the solar system forever. But now, data showed that its velocity vector had shifted. Something, or someone, had changed its direction. Initially, scientists assumed the deviation might be caused by a natural event, perhaps a small outgassing similar to what comets experience when sunlight vaporizes ice on their surface, creating a gentle thrust. But 3I Atlas wasn't behaving like a comet. Its albedo, or reflectivity, remained constant. No new gas plumes or dust tails were visible, and even under high-resolution scans from the Very Large Telescope in Chile, the object appeared inert. Yet orbital data didn't lie. The shift meant that 3I Atlas was no longer following the expected solar escape trajectory. Instead, it was slowly bending its path inward, toward the plane of the ecliptic, closer to Earth's orbital neighborhood. That realization spread quietly among astronomers before reaching the public. Most institutions refused to comment, but within a week, leaked telemetry began circulating in private scientific forums. The numbers told a chilling story. 3I Atlas had decelerated by approximately 0.02 meters per second, far too small to detect visually, but impossible to explain naturally without internal propulsion. When the European Space Agency was asked about the anomaly, an unnamed spokesperson replied only, "We are reviewing the data to rule out measurement errors." Still, those who'd seen the raw observations were unconvinced. The readings were consistent across 3 independent observatories and confirmed by radar reflection from NASA's Goldstone facility. The deviation was real. Around the same time, something else happened. The radio signal, the now infamous 47-minute pulse, began to change. Its interval shortened by 3 seconds, and a faint sub-signal emerged in the background. Analysts described it as a secondary modulation, like an echo slightly out of sync with the main transmission. Some speculated that it was a kind of correction, as if 3I Atlas was adjusting or recalibrating its broadcast. Theories ranged from the cautious to the absurd. Some argued it might be an internal structural shift, perhaps caused by rotational stress or micrometeorite impact. Others whispered about propulsion. The notion that an interstellar object might contain some form of non-natural mechanism sounded absurd, until you remembered Oumuamua, the first interstellar visitor detected years earlier, which had also shown unexplained acceleration. Many had dismissed those anomalies back then, but now history seemed to be repeating itself, only this time with radio emissions to go along. In early March, the United Kingdom Infrared Telescope captured new data that hinted at minor thermal fluctuations on the object's surface. Not bright enough to be an explosion or flare, but too structured to be random. A narrow band of heat appeared to travel across its surface once every 18 hours, like something rotating or emitting energy in cycles. "That's not a comet," said Dr. Helena Sturgis, an astrophysicist at Cambridge. "That's a machine, or something acting like one." Her quote, intended for internal notes, leaked within hours and spread rapidly online. Soon, news outlets began to run speculative headlines. NASA object changing course? Is 3i Atlas under control? Alien probe in solar system? Public interest exploded. YouTube videos, conspiracy blog, and now it was moving. By early April, the world's observatories were locked onto 3i Atlas, now universally known as the moving object. Its slow but deliberate trajectory change had defied every known law of celestial mechanics. Scientists were still searching for rational explanations when another phenomenon emerged, one that pushed the mystery from astrophysics into something much stranger. On April 9th, the pulse changed again. For months it had remained steady, repeating every 47 minutes, with minor variations. But that night, for the first time, its frequency drifted downward, sliding gradually from 1420 MHz into a lower range, until it entered the top edge of the human audible spectrum. In practical terms, it meant that anyone with a standard radio receiver could, in theory, hear the signal. It wasn't just data anymore, it was sound. The first to notice was a research assistant at the Effelsberg Radio Observatory in Germany. His monitoring system, calibrated for high-frequency radio, began to output faint audible tones. They were slow, deep, rhythmic, like a synthetic heartbeat played through layers of static. At first, the team assumed it was interference from terrestrial sources, perhaps local electronics or even internet equipment bleeding into the receiver. But after cross-checking with observatories in Spain, Finland and Japan, the pattern proved identical. The sound wasn't local, it was coming from deep space. The pulse repeated at the same 47-minute interval, but within it, the structure had changed dramatically. What had once been narrowband bursts were now wideband modulated waves, layered like chords. When converted directly into audio, they resembled a haunting, low-frequency hum that seemed to rise and fall in deliberate sequences, almost like a coded message. A senior engineer at the Max Planck Institute described it as mathematically structured noise, too random to be mechanical, too organized to be natural. Within days, recordings of the 3i Atlas sound began to circulate online, despite efforts to contain the data. The first public clip appeared on an astronomy forum under the title The Transmission. It lasted just 40 seconds but spread across the internet in hours. People who listened described feeling unsettled, as if the sound carried an emotional resonance beyond mere static. Some reported hearing a pattern like a voice beneath the hum, though spectral analysis showed nothing resembling speech. Still, thousands claimed it felt intentional. Scientists tried to stay grounded. Teams at MIT, Cambridge, and the European Space Agency's Deep Space Communication Centres began analysing the waveform in detail. They discovered harmonic relationships between certain tones, mathematical ratios corresponding to prime numbers. These weren't random coincidences. The modulation pattern encoded a sequence: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Prime numbers, universally recognised as a possible basis for intelligent communication. Yet even that was only the beginning. When converted into a spectrogram, a visual representation of sound over time, the pulse revealed faint geometric shapes, circles, arcs, and repeating patterns resembling orbital diagrams. At first, most dismissed it as an artifact of compression or interference. But after multiple independent verifications, the shapes persisted. It was as if the signal was painting something, frame by frame, every 47 minutes. "It's not speech, not language," said Dr. Eva Kramer in one of her final public statements, before being silenced by her institute. "It's information in motion, something trying to map itself into our perception." After her comment, the University of Bonn quietly took down her interview. Yet amateur researchers had already begun running their own analyses. Some claimed that by stacking spectrograms from multiple cycles, an image began to form, a spiral structure, symmetrical, with a central node and radiating lines. Others insisted it was simply noise. The scientific community was split. What united them, however, continued its silent journey closer to the inner solar system. Scientists realized the chilling truth. The transmission was no longer just a background pulse. It was evolving, growing in complexity, as though responding to something, and each new layer brought humanity one step closer to understanding, or perhaps being understood. For weeks the world had been listening. The pulse from 3i Atlas, the transmission, had become a part of nightly life for thousands of people across the globe. Radio operators, astronomers, journalists, even ordinary listeners tuned in every 47 minutes to hear the deep, resonant hum from the stars. But on May 11th, at exactly 02:47 UTC, the signal stopped. No fade out, no interference, just sudden, absolute silence. At first, observatories assumed a technical fault. The Deep Space Network in California switched to backup receivers, thinking one of their dishes had glitched. The Effelsberg team in Germany cross-checked their logs. Nothing. The waveforms were clean. No noise, no static, no trace of transmission. The signal, which had been constant for months, was gone. The initial response was confusion, not panic. Signals fluctuate, instruments fail. Yet as hours passed and the silence persisted, unease spread. By the end of the first day, every major observatory confirmed the same thing. 3i Atlas had stopped transmitting entirely. The object was still visible, faintly, through deep space telescopes, but its brightness had dropped dramatically. Over the next 48 hours, its optical signature grew weaker until it was barely distinguishable from background noise. By May 14th, it was effectively gone, not destroyed, not exploded, just missing. The trajectory that had been so carefully tracked for months now ended in uncertainty. Orbital predictions placed it near 0.41 astronomical units from Earth, but radar scans found nothing. The moving object had vanished. For the scientists who had spent months watching, the disappearance was almost unbearable. They ran simulations, searched for data corruption, recalibrated equipment, even checked for gravitational perturbations that might explain a shift in path. But every dataset told the same story. The object was gone, leaving no debris, no trace, no reflection. Some tried to argue it had fragmented, that sunlight or internal stress had broken it apart, but even fragments would reflect radar or infrared light. 3i Atlas had simply ceased to exist. The official explanation came 4 days later when NASA issued a brief press release. Interstellar object 3i Atlas has moved beyond current detection range. No unusual activity is recorded. It was a statement so vague that it only deepened the mystery. How could an object moving along a predictable trajectory vanish within detection range? Amateur astronomers didn't buy it. Across Europe, hundreds began scanning the predicted area, using private telescopes and radio receivers. A few claimed to pick up faint residual pulses, though none could be confirmed. For the first time since January, the cosmos felt empty again. The silence was almost eerie, yet something about it didn't feel final. On May 20th, an independent radio astronomer in Argentina, working outside official networks, reported a strange anomaly. At 03:34 local time, his equipment detected a narrowband burst at 1,420,405 megahertz, the same frequency as the original hydrogen line transmission. It lasted only 2 seconds and was too faint to triangulate, but its spectral pattern matched the archived data from 3i Atlas almost perfectly. When he published his findings online, the post was removed within an hour. His account disappeared. 2 days later, a second anomaly appeared, this time detected by an amateur team in Australia. The pulse lasted longer, nearly 10 seconds, with a rising modulation that mirrored the early heartbeat structure of the transmission. But unlike before, this one wasn't coming from deep space. It originated from within the solar system, somewhere near the orbit of Venus. That revelation sent shockwaves through the small circle of independent observers still following the story. If true, it meant the object hadn't vanished. It had changed position. Somehow, without visible propulsion or energy output, 3i Atlas had moved inward, closer to the Sun and closer to Earth. By early June, several radio facilities quietly resumed monitoring, though none made their work public. Leaked data later revealed that at least 2 observatories detected periodic bursts resembling echoes, almost as if the original signal were bouncing off something massive but invisible. The pattern repeated every 94 minutes, double the original interval. Then came the strangest discovery of all. When scientists reanalyzed old recordings from April, the final days before the blackout, they found that the transmission had been subtly changing pitch in a predictable way. When the frequency shifts were plotted over time, they formed a spiral curve converging on a single point in space, the inner solar system. It wasn't random. The final pulses had been coordinates, a map. It told us where it was going, said one anonymous researcher who had access to the classified files, and we didn't understand until it was already there. Governments went silent again. No official comments, no press conferences. Astronomical agencies stopped updating their 3i atlas tracking pages. News outlets that had once broadcast nightly updates turned their focus elsewhere. Public interest faded, drowned by more immediate global issues, but among scientists a quiet dread grew. If the object had indeed approached the inner solar system, it should have been visible, even faintly, in reflected sunlight. Yet no telescope recorded anything. Some proposed that it might have entered a non-reflective state, absorbing light rather than scattering it. Others theorized it had cloaked itself in plasma, becoming effectively invisible. Those were speculative ideas, bordering on science fiction, but the data forced uncomfortable possibilities. Late in June, another leak emerged. A short internal memo from the European Space Agency, dated June 28th, stated, "Unidentified radio echo received from lunar farside array. Signal characteristics consistent with 3i atlas transmission. Recommend immediate cross-verification." The memo was quickly retracted, but screenshots circulated widely. If true, it meant the signal had reappeared, not from interstellar space this time, but from near the moon. That revelation was never officially confirmed. In the absence of data, theories flourished. Some said the object had crashed into the sun. Others believed it was now in a stable orbit, hidden somewhere among the debris of near-Earth space. A few even speculated that it had achieved what it came for, and left. As weeks turned into months, the silence endured. Then, on August 2nd, 3 months after the last verified detection, a series of odd reports surfaced. Power grid monitors in several countries registered unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations. Faint, rhythmic pulses repeating every 47 minutes. The same interval as the original signal. It wasn't detected in the radio spectrum this time, but in the background noise of electrical systems themselves, as if the transmission had shifted medium. Some claimed coincidence, others weren't so sure. "The pattern never changed," said one retired engineer from the Deep Space Network who spoke under anonymity. "Only the channel did." And then he said something that stuck in the minds of everyone who heard it. When it went silent, it wasn't gone, it was listening. To this day, no one knows what happened to 3i Atlas. Officially, it remains listed in databases as lost from observation. But among those who followed its path from the beginning, the silence feels less like an ending and more like the pause before something else, a calm before arrival. Because if an object could change its own course, transmit structured information, then disappear without trace, it raises one final terrifying question. What if it didn't leave at all? What if it's already here?